Third, this budget makes investments to ensure that America has a national weather service that is second to none. Weather and climate impact approximately 1/3 of our nation's GDP. It can cost billions of dollars and claim thousands of lives per year. NOAA continues its commitment to build a weather-ready nation and provide citizens with the most timely, accurate, and well-communicated forecast information. Specifically, this budget invests in several targeted areas needed to improve weather service capability and service delivery to meet key user needs. This includes improving the geographic accuracy for hazardous weather and improving the prediction of precipitation and temperature outlooks for the 3 to 4 week range, a time frame that is essential for emergency managers to prepare for and mitigate these extreme events. And finally, this budget aims to improve our agency's core operations. Every day, NOAA employees strive to execute our mission with discipline and consistency and timeliness. However, we cannot perform our core functions at the highest level when our support services cannot keep pace with the growing demand. And in recent years, our support functions have fallen drastically behind. This threatens our ability to recruit, retain, and reward the best talent possible and to ensure our customers receive the best service possible. It compromises our ability to engage with the private sector and academia and to provide you with the quality and timeliness of accountability reporting that you rightly expect. Our FY16 request for corporate services is smaller but similar to what we requested in FY15 and will focus on improving corporate service functions, in particular in our workforce and acquisition and grants arena. Overall, NOAA's FY16 budget request reflects the commitment of Secretary Pritzker that she and I have made to the President to growing a strong economy that is built to last while being fiscally responsible and focusing on priority initiatives. I'm proud to serve with this vital component of the United States government, helping to maximize the United States' competitiveness, enable economic growth, foster science and technological leadership, and promote environmental stewardship. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and members of this committee, as well as our partners and our constituents, to achieve the goals that I've articulated through the implementation of this budget. And I thank you for this opportunity to make a comment.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Appreciate your testimony and your leadership of the agency. And as a father of a daughter and who is keenly interested in the sciences, if I could just like to open by asking if you could tell the committee and anyone out there listening, particularly young girls who are thinking about going into the sciences, tell us about what led you to, I see you had a major in geology and of course then went on to join NASA. Tell us what led you into the sciences, what inspired you, and talk to us a little bit about any barriers that you encountered as a woman, if any, and what you did to overcome those.
Well, it's very kind of you to inquire, Mr. Chairman. I was driven from a very young age by a strong curiosity, basically a strong geographic curiosity about virtually every aspect of geography: landscapes, climate, critters, peoples, cultures, and frankly, if you poked me as a little girl and asked me what my dream was, it was to figure out how someone bought me airline tickets so I could actually get to go to all these exotic places and learn firsthand about those phenomena and those people and those places. I first began thinking I would parlay a strength I have in foreign languages into a career like that, and so I actually chose my college as a language and linguistics major. I was already fluent in French and German, and I wanted to go into Russian. And happily, that college had the wisdom to require me as an arts and language major to take 3 science courses, which I thought was a terrible idea at the time. They won, and I discovered geology and oceanography and saw in the lives and the work of my young professors, all of whom were male, but I admired their curiosity, I admired their spunk getting out into the field. They invited us into the passion that they felt for understanding this planet and how it works, and for turning that information, that scientific data, into information that could really help people live better.
Dr. Robert Ballard's specialty is geology.
Well, and young Dr. Ballard and I went to sea together in 1974 on the cruise that began his arc of fame. He was at that time a very wet behind the ears postdoc who was frankly doing all the grunt work for the big names who were aboard the cruise. I was even more junior to Bob, so I got to do the even grimier grunt work. But that was quite a remarkable voyage in its own right. And it was those sorts of experiences, the chance to live overseas in Norway for a year for my junior year, that re-shifted my focus towards geology and oceanography, towards the North Atlantic in particular, which is why I studied in Canada. Barriers to overcome, I was blessed to have parents that inoculated me through their confidence and their composure, that any interest their child has is an interest that's valid for that youngster to pursue, and the peanut gallery doesn't get to edit those choices, but also strong enough to tell me, you know, you've got to work hard at the things you care about. Mastery is an important thing, unless you just want to make it your hobby. And so that gave me, I think, some ability to proceed on an ignorance is bliss basis. If my work was good, I just managed to largely ignore people who thought it was odd that I should be doing this. You know, it's challenging, and you certainly can meet a boss or a mentor or a supervisor who more actively tries to hold you back. I was fortunate to not meet any really malicious people who aimed to hold me back, but there were plenty who challenged me hard, and I think it's fair to say that those of us women in the early days of oceanography and geology in the astronaut corps, I think we certainly had to reach to a higher level to be accredited as basically capable. You know, that's not a bad thing. It does make you stronger.
It does indeed make you stronger. And it's a great story, and I saw that you were on the mission that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope, which continues
25th anniversary this coming month.
Yeah, continues to give tremendous benefits to all of humanity. And the space program in particular, I know, is a vital part of the work that you do at NOAA, and we're all of us on the committee concerned and want to make sure there's as little a gap as possible in our coverage of our satellites. There was some early problems with the management of the polar weather satellite. We have, all of us on the committee, we reviewed the Inspector General's report, who points out their potential gap in data between the current on-orbit polar weather satellite, the NPP, should it fail, or if there's a launch failure for the next polar satellite. Congress included $111 million in the Hurricane Sandy supplemental to address this gap and the overall lack of program robustness. So we've essentially fully funded NOAA's weather satellite procurement requests over the last several years. What distinct actions has NOAA taken to address the potential gap, and what is your best estimate on the length of the gap that might occur, and what could we do, if anything, to move up the launch of the JPSS-1?
Thanks for that question. We have done a number of things. One is we along with our partners at NASA, we looked carefully at how we're managing the current primary satellite, the NPP satellite, making sure that we're working well within margins, we're not overstraining systems, doing everything we possibly can within the operations of that satellite itself to up the likelihood that it will last to and beyond its design life. That's all going to be statistics. You can make a guess. Mr. Fatah can make a guess. Mrs. Herrera-Butler can make a guess. And a micrometeorite could hit it tomorrow, or it could run for a long time. So we're doing that. We're doing everything we can to extend the life of NPP. We scrubbed the JPSS-1 procurement schedule very assiduously, again, with our NASA colleagues and our vendors. We've pulled that to the left as far as it is technically possible to do. The big constraint there are the long lead parts and the intricacy of assembling the primary instruments that make the key vertical profiles of the atmosphere. And there's just only so much that our vendors tell us they can compress that given the realities of their supply chains. Thirdly, you'll recall we mounted an array of activities with, in particular, the Sandy supplemental funds aimed at inoculating ourselves in every other way we could against a loss of data. So factors that feed into that are improvements in our operational supercomputing capacity at the Weather Service, improvements in what's called data assimilation, the mathematics by which you pull the data into the system. That actually can play a significant role in the skill, the final result of a model. We've been doing some assessments of whether short fill temporary data sources, how might they make up for a loss of JPSS satellite from purchasing more aircraft data. We buy data from commercial suppliers of measurements from airplanes, for example. The key contributor there is the COSMIC radio occultation system. There's a COSMIC version 1 in orbit now, but well past its design life, and our focus on securing all 12 of the COSMIC 2 sensors goes very directly to the notion that they can play a significant role should we lose polar satellite data.
What's your best estimate today of the potential gap, and when is the your best estimate on when you can launch, and what, if anything, can we do to help speed that up?
JPSS-1 has been meeting every budget and scheduled target consistently for the last 24 months. The program is now, has retired those management risks that were a problem in the 2009, 10, 11 timeframe. Our GAO colleagues concur in that assessment. It is now a stable and well-managed program. It is on track to launch in the very beginning of calendar 17. I would have to pick a random number, Mr. Culbertson. You'd have to decide what probability of a failure do you want me to calculate the number on, and you can get a range from
Your
12
best
to 14.
personal estimate.
You can get, depending how you call the statistics, you could say it's a 12 to 14 or 18 month, and there are more cautious or worried people who would say, oh, it could be 36 or 48 months. It entirely depends on
Sure.
what probability. If you want to tell me I want a 90% probability or 80 or 40 or 30, that gap length will vary significantly. So it's a pretty random exercise to try to pick a gap length.
Sounds like from your answer there's not much we could do to speed that up. The supply chain, your vendors tell you there's only so much they can do. Not much then therefore this subcommittee could do to help you speed up or make that launch date any earlier than early 2017?
We have turned over every rock, and we have asked them point blank, if we could provide an additional slug of money, can we change this? And they tell us they can't. They don't have the wherewithal to stand up separate parallel lines. The important thing to do, in our view, is to move out with this budget and establish the Polar Follow-On Program, because it is that. It is breaking out of this one-at-a-time procurement cycle and moving towards a more economically effective multiple satellite purchase that will prevent us from kicking this gap further down the road and having the same problem at JPSS-2 and ever thereafter.
Thank you. Mr. Fatah?
I think it was Dr. Harris, Bernard Harris, who wrote the book The Dream Walker, and he talked about walking in space, and he said that when you're out there and you're facing Earth, it's warmer, and when you're facing away, it's colder. I hope you know it's warmer in here. When you're here, we want to help you do what you want to do and what you need to do on behalf of the country. And, you know, the work of NOAA, this satellite gap that the chairman raised, as we know, because the committee looked at this early on, this was set in place well before your tenure, well before this administration came into being. So, but it's a problem that we have to help solve. And as you say, that the best case scenario is for the life of the existing satellite to move as well as it can within the probabilities of some type of failure, catastrophic or otherwise, until the new satellite can launch. But in terms of going forward, in terms of not being, I guess there are two sides to this. One is the satellite repair, you know, there's the need for finding, and we funded this in NASA, some effort to start to look at how we can extend lives of existing satellites, you know, because we got a lot of satellites floating around out there. But also, your point is correctly taken, which is that one of the things the committee can do, even as we look at this in the rearview mirror, this gap that none of us had anything to do with, is to make sure we don't repeat the same mistake, and that we forward fund and take the necessary steps to make sure that, because these satellites are critical to our weather. And so and as I understand when we talk about severe weather events, these billion-dollar-plus events, you know, our ability to project where these incidents are going to take place have improved dramatically. And therefore, our warning systems, in terms of moving people, we've saved lives. And we're also, because we know more about what's going to happen, we're in just a much better position. So it's a worthwhile investment. And I know that the committee also did some work in terms of tsunami warning systems. And maybe you could talk to us about where we are with the investments that we've made there, and whether there is any additional work we need to do in that trade space.
Thank you, Mr. Fatah. We have made great strides forward in weather forecast capability. Earlier this year, we were able to step up the operational supercomputing capacity ×3 and sharpen the resolution of our models from 13 kilometers to 3 kilometers. You know, if you're Craig Fugate or a city or county emergency manager, that boils down to now being able to give you a projection of where the key severe weather and storms are going to be. That's down to the street and block level, not to just the city level. Tremendous step forward. On tsunamis, what we've been able to do most recently. Thank you. I had commented we've stepped our operational supercomputing capacity up 3 times, and that's let our model resolution get down to storm scale. So we're pinpointing a storm in a neighborhood, not roughly a storm somewhere over your city. That's a tremendous improvement for emergency management folks. From 13 kilometers to 3 kilometers, but that's about the computing power that lets us put a finer grid cell into the model. That's been a huge step forward. That model, when we ran it in parallel with the derecho a couple of years ago, we had 10-hour warning on the derecho, which is what let us get the emergency manager. Derecho. Mrs. Herrera Butler will correct my pronunciation if I'm off. Well, yeah. With respect to tsunami warnings, one of our key concerns there had been the buoy. We have buoys on the deep sea floor of the Pacific and Indian and Atlantic Oceans that measure the tsunami. When the tsunami is about a ½ an inch high in the middle of the ocean, this sensor on the seafloor 15,000 feet below can detect it and help us triangulate where it's going and how it's going to develop. And they're far away out in the middle of the ocean, and they're in deep water. It takes very specially equipped ships to be able to service them. And their in-service rate had fallen off because of declines in ship time due largely to the fuel price increases. We've been able to get that tsunami buoy network back up to its 80% operational target. So throughout the entire system. Yeah, 80%. So that's been a real success, and we have both our Anchorage and our Hawaii forecast centers that model the whole globe. You have to model the whole globe to do tsunami forecasting, the entire global ocean. That can be done anywhere. We do it in Anchorage and we do it in Hawaii. The Hawaii Center is linked to the International Tsunami Warning Center so that our international partners like the Indonesians or the Indians, the Malaysians, collaborate, and they take the warnings and propagate them through their emergency system to protect their citizens.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I'm going to bore you with snapper. Dr. Sullivan, thank you.
We're very interested in Texas as well.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to be very honest. I need your help, your leadership on the snapper issue. The past several years have been incredibly controversial, and it's going to get so much more controversial tomorrow with the publication of the new rule. I understand that balancing the fish stock, balancing the accountability of commercial, for hire, and recreational. Some members choose to go all in with one sector. I don't. First thing I did when I got elected was I put together a council in my district, which includes NIMS, NOAA, and other agencies, as you know, of all 3 sectors, to try to figure out where the sectors could actually agree we needed improvement. And the one area, hands down, every single sector agrees on is data. Nobody believes the data. Nobody believes the data. Magnuson requires the use of best science in determining closures. We've seen snapper go from 75 days to 9 days, and I'm pretty sure after tomorrow's rule publication, we'll go to 6 days. But nobody believes the data behind the rules. And so as these rules are published and create such controversy, it's the underlying data behind that if we can improve the data collection, and we can meet the requirements of Magnuson. If you can then justify those closures and the stakeholders believe the data, okay, that's fine. But there's such suspicion about the data that it creates the controversy behind the rules. And so my question for you is on your view of how are we achieving best science, how are you achieving best science ahead of any rule decisions determining closures to comply with Magnuson.
And could you talk about the rule itself that they're going to publish tomorrow?
So tomorrow's rule, well, perhaps if you want to explain the rule, it essentially is going to reduce, you're going to create a buffer zone to reduce the quota number or data number on which you allow for days by 20% to ensure there's no overage.
And
So
based
essentially,
on-
you're taking what had been a 100% pool and reducing it to 80 to determine closures, which is part of the concern of
Right.
recreational.
And based on what data, which is a really important question also when it comes to
Sure.
weather data for global warming.
And I'll also share, in its acknowledgement of the challenge you face, it is easy to get compliance and accountability from commercial because of the way it's regulated. It's slightly easier with for-hire. Recreational, it's very difficult to determine their accountability. The challenge, though, it creates, though, is in musical chairs, when the music stops, recreational are the last people standing, and
Right.
they have no ability for redress. So how are you complying with Magnuson's requirement of best science?
It's a complex issue and a complex question, but as you note, it's a very important one and a very challenging one, in particular in the Gulf. Just as a backdrop, although it's counterintuitive, part of what we're dealing with here is a cognitive dissonance that comes from the success that actually has been achieved in the Gulf in actually rebuilding the stock. There are more snapper, and they are larger, and they are being seen now in places where they haven't been seen for decades. And all of that is thanks to the discipline and the self-sacrifice of constituents, including the recreational fishers.
If I may, though, that creates a circular argument, and I've had this conversation because if you declare the success of the past management plan because now we have more snapper than ever, why are the days going down?
Well, yes, so there's where the apparent inconsistency comes in, and the catch limits for snapper are set on weight, and so when you get bigger fish, fewer fish total up to that weight sooner, and that's had the sort of ironic and counterintuitive consequence of shortening the number of days because the weight quota is met faster with the bigger fish. I completely sympathize with the sort of clash that creates for your folks down in the Gulf.
And in Texas, I'm keenly interested in this question, so
No,
don't be constrained, Mr. Jolly, by that
I,
light.
I've got a solution for you.
Down.
Okay.
I know it goes all across around the Gulf states.
And you're going to hear about salmon from the West Coast.
I suspected that might be the case. With respect to data, and our Southeast region is actually a good example, is we have completely open data calls. Anybody, any party can bring data, and it's everyone adjudicates and debates which data meet the quality standards that the council has
Right.
agreed must be met for anybody's data to be accepted. If one of my guys brings a study in that doesn't meet those standards, it doesn't get included
Right.
in the data that will go into the assessment. So we do use outside data. We rely on it.
Well, you make the call for data, but I can tell you those who try to participate feel as though they really don't have a seat at the table, that
And
is
is the
not
whole
considered.
process transparent and the data out there for independent verification?
It is?
So let me ask you a question, and I realize the time is up. Let me ask you your opinion on a model that has come out of my council. And understand the council includes all sectors. We've had representatives from your agency, from NIMPS, from state regulators sit at the table as well with us to brainstorm on things. Staying out of the controversy of days and catch shares. If the issue is data that everybody agrees on, everybody's suspicious of, they feel like they don't have a seat at the table, they can submit proposals, they get rejected. How about this model? The agency currently has cooperative research institutes. What if under the jurisdiction of NIMPS, so within the jurisdiction and control of your agency, there was a cooperative research institute that existed with personnel as well as funding to let out competitively awarded peer-reviewed research contracts, so that rather than making the decision when the data is presented, you're actually making the decision on proposals submitted by third-party data collectors. It could be major research universities. It could be commercial fishermen who have a GPS iPhone data system that works. It could be recreational. But it would be, one, it would bring them to the table. It would be their opportunity to participate, and if they chose not to, well, then shame on them. But to have a cooperative research institute under Mr. Crabtree's jurisdiction to let out competitive contracts to research universities, recreational angler groups, commercial and others that met peer-reviewed processes. Let out the contracts. That information then is owned by NIMS, and we know has to then be incorporated because they've approved the manner in which it's being collected. Would that be a way to satisfy the?
Well, we do fund, and I know, Mr. Crabtree, I can get the statistics for you and give you a more detailed briefing. That is the purpose of NIMS cooperative research. We don't have to establish and pay the overhead of having an institute per se, because the cooperative research budget lines that we have within NIMS are intended to do exactly that. I'd be happy to get the detailed data on how much cooperative research is being done and associated with snapper across the Gulf. Whoever does that cooperative research, and whoever collects those data on the back end, the data have to pass a peer review, be accepted into, so I mean, if my guys could go out and do a bad job on a cruise too. We don't want their data going in unquality checked. So I would prefer to not put extra overhead expenses into setting up an institute per se with all the administrivia that might come along with that.
But here's
I'd like to bring back the data on what cooperative research is actually currently being done with respect to snapper in the Gulf. I don't know those figures. I don't know the dollar values or the participants.
and being incorporated into the closure decisions.
Certainly worth looking at.
Because
that is exactly
because here's the
answer.
other thing I think we would accomplish with that. We would eliminate the suspicion by the sector participants, particularly recreational, who believe today, and I know you know this, but I live it. They do not believe that they have a seat at the table. They believe they see more fish than they've ever seen before, and they see a constant reduction annually of the days they're allowed to fish, and it doesn't make sense. And the more people I hear from the agency who say, our plan is working, I ask the question, are you declaring success? Because if you're declaring success, then tomorrow's rule is not necessary. And so there are more fish than ever, and yet our recreational guys, and listen, this means something in communities on quality of life, of course, but it also means things for our economy. This is a very fragile economic model, and it is destructive to the quality of life to coastal communities. And so I started by saying I need your help, and I mean that to set a tone that I'm not beating up on the agency, but I'm telling you what's being implemented right now is broken. And I've tried to find a solution we've gotten to this Cooperative Research Institute idea. And I'll be honest, I appreciate that you've said there is cooperative research going on. From this committee's perspective and from compliance with Magnuson, unless you can demonstrate the teeth behind that and our ability to provide accountability and oversight of the third-party data that is including everybody, I still would want to push for something that establishes a cooperative research institute that we know is accountable. So, Dr. Sullivan, I appreciate very much your willingness to engage in this conversation.
Very much willing to follow up with you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you.
And I'd like to offer, maybe we could sit down together and have a follow-up meeting on this, because it's a keen interest to me as well, and in Texas. And Washington State and the West Coast have got similar concerns that are maybe not identical, but they've also got some real serious concerns about fisheries, because it's so important to their economy as well. So I'll indulge you guys.
But there are a few fishermen and women in the New England area too. I would say. So I know there's a lot of interest in these catch share things, so
that's right.
We'd be glad to participate. Yeah.
Water quality's improved so much around the Gulf Coast. We're seeing porpoises and improvements in stocks and areas, like you said, we haven't seen them before. The data collection is so vital to make sure the data is accurate. I can't find in your submitted statement, I heard you say that this is the warmest year on record. Where is that, and what are you referring to?
Those are the global atmospheric temperatures.
I mean, is that where in your, I can't figure out where in your, is that something in your summary that you added?
I'll have to page through my written testimony.
Okay. Okay. The data has to be accurate. I mean, that's what the most important thing. As long as we've got good data, that's something we can all work with. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns, whether it be with the climate or with fisheries or with anything else that we do, when it comes to the National Science Foundation, with NASA, with NOAA. We just need good data to make good decisions. We've got to be certain the data is accurate. So I concur completely. And we ran a little over, but that's okay. And when it comes to salmon on the West Coast, you guys can do the same thing. So Mr.
Well,
Gilman.
the issue there is whether you're going to go with the natural hatcheries or you got a lot going on up there in Washington State.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Sullivan. I do want to talk about salmon, but I want to start on coastal resiliency issues. I represent a district with a whole ton of coastline, and as a consequence, we're challenged by everything from storms to tsunamis to you name it. And in fact, I've got 3 tribes in our district that are in the process of trying to move to higher ground because of persistent challenges. In FY15, NOAA received an additional $5 million to expand its regional coastal resilience grants programs. I just want to get a sense of, one, do you have a sense of when the details of that funding opportunity are going to be made public, and to what extent will the state coastal zone management programs be engaged as part of that effort? And then, in addition, it seems like a lot of the funding is primarily targeted at capacity building and planning. Are we doing enough to actually provide resources on the ground to these communities that are, that currently lack the capacity to actually address if there's going to be a massive storm or a tsunami or whatnot? And then I'll also throw in, while I'm asking you questions, how do you see that work being done through this proposal, complementing the existing resiliency work being done by the Integrated Ocean Observing System and the Sea Grant programs?
Thank you for those questions.
You bet.
I don't have the exact date at my fingertips of when we'll have that FFO out. I know it is in final stages, so I do expect it very shortly. And it, the regional ocean partnerships, the coastal zone programs, all I think could be competitive under the terms that I think will be the final terms of it. But it's soon, and we'll be happy to get back to you when we've got the exact date on that. Your next question was about the capacity, and I have really seen that vividly as I've traveled around. I was in Hoboken on the 2nd anniversary of Sandy, talking with the mayor there about what are they doing, how are they trying to get up on the curve of the kind of challenges they have there, where they can get flooded from every side and up through the ground. I've been down in New Orleans and met with that city's mayor and resilience manager, and just a couple weeks ago stopped by New York to talk with both the Bloomberg and the Rockefeller foundations that are also trying to move some of their financial capacity and expertise out to do just what you say, to help communities build the capacity within their municipal governments, to do smarter planning, to be more aware of the vulnerabilities they have, to have the kind of information tools, which again start with data and start with sound maps. And key to those maps along the coastal zones are, of course, the coastal bathymetry, solid and accurate bathymetry, water level data, the kind of data that NOAA provides from our coastal intelligence arena. The scale of the need is huge, and I can't begin to say that we're doing enough yet to really meet what we hear and see from communities as demand within NOAA. Our budget request this year has a couple of asks in it that reflect that. A couple $1 million to provide an AmeriCorps kind of service capacity out in the field to get out to those communities and help them begin to start up their own efforts. An expansion of the regional coastal resilience grants from 5, which was barely enough to begin taking the lessons learned and practices from the Sandy area out beyond New York, New Jersey, to 45. And the uses we would intend with these funds are right on the points that we heard loud and clear from the state and local and tribal leaders who came together in the President's task force in the wake of Sandy. The whole federal family wanted to be sure that we were not talking to ourselves about what the needs are and what the real gaps in their capability are, but that we actually heard from them about what do you most need from the federal government to help you. And when it comes to NOAA, what they most need are the kind of environmental intelligence data that we provide, the very simple first order tools that are sort of their starting set tools, and that bit of technical support that lets them begin to develop the fluency and the competency they need to take those tools and go forward and plan and work within their community.
I want to make sure to ask about some of the salmon recovery efforts, and I know Ms. Herrera-Butler will also be chiming in on this. I wanted to raise two concerns. One about the $3 million cut to salmon management the salmon management activities account, and the target and Mitchell hatcheries in particular. I think if you talk to folks on the ground in our neck of the woods, they would disagree with the assessment that that level of funding would enable them to meet NOAA's obligation. And I don't understand, and perhaps you can speak to, how do we actually improve our hatcheries and ensure species recovery when we're moving backwards in terms of funding? And then in addition, when Secretary Pritzker spoke in front of the committee, I asked her about the ongoing challenges facing our hatcheries, which need approved hatchery genetic management plans, HGMPs, to ensure compliance under an Endangered Species Act. And she said that they were increasing staff from 2 to 6, and I certainly appreciate that, but we got a backlog of 100 HGMPs that have been submitted for review and approval. We've already seen some hatcheries that are operating without sufficient HGMPs be subject to litigation, even get shut down. And that affects our tribes, and it affects the recovery efforts, and it affects our fisheries. So how long does it take to review and approve one individual HGMP, and is there any estimate to how long it's going to take with 6 staff to complete this backlog?
We do really appreciate this question, and we very much understand your concerns about the Mitchell Act hatcheries. They are a mainstay of salmon and tribal treaty rights in the Columbia River, and we appreciate the points you're making about the economy. We have requested level funding for these hatcheries for many years, and we do believe that that level of funding meets our basic obligations. We appreciate that out on the ground folks see more need and more interest, but I assure we're committed to working closely with your partners on the ground, but the level of request we are confident does satisfy our basic obligations. With respect to the genetic plans, we are going to increase our staff and redirect resources to go from 2 to 6. My understanding is that that should let us clear 40 genetic plans, so we could get through that backlog within a couple of years. But it's part of a larger picture. If you look at our endangered species consultation, our genetic management plan consultations, our essential fish habitat consultations, the fact of the matter is that our staff levels are very woefully shy of what it would take to really move any of those forward in a timely fashion. On our southeast region, for example, we have a total of 15 staff that are facing a backlog of 550 permit actions on which we're responsible for endangered species and fish habitat consultation. That's a tremendous strain and a morale drain on my team, which I care about, but more importantly, that makes those permits an impediment to viable and valid economic activity in that region. And so that is why you will see in this budget request a request for increased consultative capacity, because we are trying to get ourselves out of precisely these backlog holes that you're referring to.
It's a really big deal.
It is a big deal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize the gentlelady from Washington State.
You know, I was going to start with sea lions, but I'll kind of piggyback off of Mitchell, because I've asked about HGMPs as well. And I mean, you talked about level funding, but NOAA requests a decrease of $3 million in the salmon management activities account, and those reductions target Mitchell Act hatcheries. So that's not level funding, that's a reduction. And even under level funding, we know that the number of fish released is decreasing as costs escalate. Moreover, the funding is needed to ensure these hatcheries are maintained. Just this last week, an estimated 200,000 coho salmon fry died in my district, at the Kalama Falls Hatchery in Cowlitz County, after a generator pump failed. And I'm not sure the age of the pump, but it's very reflective of deferred maintenance action and aging infrastructure on our Mitchell Act facilities due to funding shortfalls. So 200,000 coho fry is a big deal. And so, and despite all this, you know, I've asked this question. I think the gentleman from Washington has also asked this question. NOAA states in their budget document they're able to meet their obligation for operation and maintenance, and that their obligation will be fulfilled with regard to hatcheries. And I mean, I'm really hoping this isn't the beginning, but the reason we raise it is we're very, very concerned. I would expect you to ask for an increase if that's the biggest issue, but instead you're asking for a decrease.
Well, I think if you look at the president's budget requests over the years, those, my understanding is, have been level at the level we're asking for this year. I think the Congress has supplemented that from year to year. But I'd be happy to go back and look at that figure and look at the trends and get you the detailed information.
Well, I mean, we've put obviously more money into some of the salmon recovery activities. Even before I was on the subcommittee, just on the full committee, we worked really hard with the Pacifico Salmon Recovery Fund, and we're able to restore funding there. But we need it to be your priority as well, I guess. Switching over, I wanted to show, this is what I got the chairman in trouble for. I was trying to show him something that I would love to show everyone. We can pass it around, there's only a couple of us, but I wanted to make sure you saw it. Those are sea lions and seals. That's the mouth of the Columbia River on February 15th. This, go to my ports, up and down the Columbia, there's between just the mouth and the port of Portland, so that obviously doesn't go all the way inland, there are an estimated 7,000 sea lions and seals, and they are gorging on our salmon. That we spend a lot of money, time, and heartache trying to protect because it's important to us. Any kind of dock they'll sit on. A couple years ago, we had there was about 6 or 7 of them that had died, and it was when, and I'm going to lead into this, the immediate assumption in the paper was that someone had, like, you know, passionate tribesmen or recreational fishers had killed them. What later we found out was they engorged themselves, and they died.
Oh, great.
Yeah, on salmon. I don't know if you've ever fished in the Columbia River, but it's really discouraging to commercial recreational fishers when you get one on the line and only the head comes up. Or you see prehistoric sturgeon lying along the banks with one bite taken out of the middle. I mean, it's a real problem, which is why I introduced the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act, and it allows for an increased take, lethal removal of some of these animals. At most, it would be 92 a year. You're looking at about 7,000. So we're not in any way going to harm the population, but I guess I wanted to know if NOAA has a prediction on how big these populations have grown. Have you determined the size of the population on the Columbia River system and what it could support? And is there an adequate sea lion population size?
I don't have those detailed figures at my fingertips, Mrs. Herrera-Butler. You know, the broad trend is clear, and your images show it very graphically of a tremendous recovery over the past 3 decades. I'd be happy to go double check with our NIMS folks and get a briefing brought up to you, bring it myself if you'd like, on exactly what the population numbers are and if they've got an equilibrium population estimate based on what we see happening with the ocean conditions off the northwest coast.
I would be happy to have that. What I'm most interested in, so part of the reason we had to introduce this bill is right now the agencies do have the authority to lethally remove some of these animals, and we don't feel like it's happening quickly enough. The tribes agree. The commercial and recreational fishers agree. The community agrees, and even a lot of conservationists agree that we're losing an endangered population because of what seems like an historic or unhistoric population of sea lions that we need your help.
So in people's memory, they've never seen this many sea lions before.
No. And we used to get amazing salmon runs. Like, we have our efforts, our recovery efforts are working. We are seeing record runs of all different types. That's why we want to continue the hatchery programs. It's all working. The spill we do over the dams, the mitigation, it's working. But now we've attracted these animals from California, and they just sit there and gorge. It's a real problem. So. Well, I don't know. They're talking to each other, apparently, and they're saying, hey, the Pacific Northwest is an entree for endangered salmon. Come have your fill. Yeah, yeah. So with that, I do look forward to your help on this. This is something, it's not going to go away.
Glad to do that.
Thank you.
Chairman, thank you for being here today. As you know, all regions of our country, from blizzards in the Midwest to earthquakes on the West Coast and hurricanes in the southern and eastern United States, our country has to be mindful and prepared for when weather-related disasters do unfortunately occur. And without forecasts and models and up-to-date predictions on the timing and strength of these natural disasters, Americans would be completely caught off guard. So I want to thank you for all you do for our nation's citizens, for this safety and infrastructure and natural landscapes. Hurricanes and all that are packed along with them, high winds, possible flooding, the usual spin-off tornadoes are one of the most severe weather-related disasters that my constituents in Alabama's 2nd Congressional District have to be mindful of during the summer and fall months. So if you can share with me the results and major findings of the first successful launch of the unmanned aircraft system directly into the eye of the hurricane last year, if you could talk about that a little bit. And then my follow-up question to that is, do you feel that this should be repeated? And if so, does the budget, do you request money to do so in this year's budget? So if you just talk about that a little bit and how it is had a positive impact.
Thank you for that question, Mrs. Roby. Data from actual measurements of the conditions inside a hurricane are very critical to the accuracy of track forecasting. And on a research front, as you know very well, we've had much better success scientifically improving track forecasts over the last couple decades. The error cones are much narrower now than they were 20 years ago. Getting the intensity right and getting shifts in intensity, jumps in intensity, has been a much more challenging problem. The science hasn't cracked that nut yet. Data measurements inside active storms are key to both of those. That's why we operate the 2 P-3 aircraft that we do that have tail Doppler radar and other instruments and fly at various levels right through the heart of the storm at different points in time to characterize it. The experiment we did with the, I've just lost the name of the little vehicle. Anyway, the small unmanned aircraft that we deployed out of a sonobuoy tube, its wings pop out and it navigated itself down through the storm. So in a sonobuoy, we drop out before it just plummets basically right straight down through. What we were interested in with this device is it has some capability to navigate and actually fly around, not just fall straight through. And how might that help us better characterize the lower couple of thousand feet of the storm? Our P-3s don't fly below, I think it's 3,000 feet. It might be 4, but for obvious safety reasons, there's an altitude they stay at or above. And the lowest level of the storm, where you've got all the friction with the ocean and the picking up of the moisture, the transfer of energy from the ocean to the hurricane, that's clearly a pretty critical part of the storm, and it's impossible to sample it. We've done 2 experiments in the last couple years. One is we took a self-propelled ocean glider, which we're also experimenting with, the kind of unmanned systems we're doing small-scale pilots with to see how they might help improve our mission. And 2 seasons ago, we had one of them move in sort of a picket line underneath the storm, so we could get some measurements as the storm went over it. They move really slow. You got to put them out, or put enough of them out that the storm goes over some of them. So that's a bit of a logistics challenge. In this case, dropping this little device through and letting it fly around a bit, it survived down to the sea surface. It did get us some very low-level winds, and that is the snapshot summary that I have. I'd be happy to get our research teams to come up and give you some more information on that if you'd like. First experiments can be intriguing. We, of course, need to do a couple more runs, and then we could really understand how many of these would it take to make a meaningful data contribution. What are the prices and the operations really come up to all in cost? Does it prove to be cost efficient or not? So I would say right now both the ocean glider and the small UAV are in the tantalizing, not even yet in the promising stage, but in the tantalizing stage, and we will continue to work at a pilot scale through the next hurricane season or so.
Okay, and just real quick, I see the yellow light. Shifting gears to tornadoes, which also is something that we deal with quite frequently in Alabama every year, and have unfortunately had some pretty devastating tornadoes in recent history that we've lost a lot of life, and so it's a big deal. And in the last year's appropriation bill, you were provided with funding to collaborate with the National Science Foundation, and it said, quote, to initiate a project to understand how environmental factors that are characteristic of the southeastern United States affect the formation, intensity, and storm path of tornadoes in the region. In this year's budget request, my understanding is that you've asked to terminate this, and it's the Vortex Southeast project, and I can take it for the record, but just want to know more specifics about, did that project ever really begin, and why are you terminating it, and what assurances can you provide this committee that you guys are going to continue to really study tornadoes in the southeast part of our country?
Let me commit to come back up and give you a full briefing on that and the whole array of things that we're doing centered on tornado forecasting. As I assure you, it remains a front and center focus of ours, given the hazards and the loss of life that you've reflected.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I went over. I yield back.
A little bit. Thank you. That's fine. I want to ask a little bit about the polar satellite follow-on, because you've requested $380 million in new funding for this, and the out-year budgets for this program are substantial, growing to nearly $600 million in 2 years. If you could describe for us what the funding would buy in terms of risk reduction, robustness for the Joint Polar Satellite System, and then you mentioned earlier efficiencies, I believe, in acquiring systems simultaneously. Talk to us a little bit more about that, if you could.
Certainly. As you may recall, we had an independent review team come by about 1.5 years ago now, Tom Young and Tom Moorman, the real established experts in large satellite procurement, and do a very rigorous assessment of the Joint Polar Satellite System. They'd been tracking it as it came out of the NPOS era, and they wire brushed us really properly, but also thoroughly, over the fact that we were buying these systems in about as dumb a way as you possibly could. You'd buy one, you do all the design and engineering, you get all the supply chain spun up, produce one, and say thank you very much, and let that all decay back. And then a few years later you go, oh, I meant I needed another one, and you did incur all those expenses again. And it's exactly the wrong way to buy any large complex system, but certainly satellites. They also worked with us to better understand how we needed to wrap our head around not just the gap, but the robustness that is what gets you out of having a gap.
So NOAA's actually designing and building the spacecraft, overseeing the design and construction of the spacecraft.
NOAA holds the observing requirements and the budget authority for the spacecraft, and we work hand in glove with NASA to actually do the development and execution of the design. There's no need to duplicate the satellite acquisition expertise that NASA has. So we rely on them as the acquisition agent.
Okay, so NASA is actually the lead on this.
NOAA is the lead. NASA is our acquisition partner. So the polar follow-on, we looked at the JPSS 1 and 2 program, which is the current program of record as established. We looked at the timing that we had managed to set for that based on our gap mitigation efforts and scrubbing that all to the left. And then we looked at the existing spacecraft, the structure that you're going to bolt the instruments onto, and the instrument contracts, and said how quickly could we get to robustness? Robustness means the satellite system we depend upon for our weather forecasts can tolerate one failure and still support weather forecasting, and you could restore its capacity within about a year. That's the typical space architecture definition of robustness. And your greatest risk of losing that is when you're launching a satellite, because that's the highest risk moment in the life of a satellite. So robust architecture has the next satellite in sequence ready right close to a launch date to cover that big risk. You don't actually launch it right then. You launch it when you're getting towards the outer edge of the age. But you separate your production cadence from your launch cadence. And the PFO program is the best path we could craft to move to that kind of an approach. Number one, it establishes congressional authorization for satellites beyond the JPSS-2 satellite. And if you look at the lead time it takes to build our instruments, if we don't start right about now on those next two spacecraft, we will be repeating the prospect of a big gap as we're looking at now.
I want to dive into this more with you in separate meetings, because I really don't know. I mean, it is, I understand you're working hand in glove with NASA, but I want to understand more about how that process works. It seems to me, logically, you ought to just let NASA build the spacecraft for you, and NOAA obviously be the customer and provide funding, but NASA does a pretty good job.
They do a very good job. In this particular mission, Mr. Chairman, where there is such tight integration from the satellite specifics to the actual model input and the model architecture, that vertical alignment of responsibility and the ability to look end to end, from engineering decisions you might make on the satellite to implications for a very large and complex national modeling architecture on which the weather forecast accuracy critically depends. That end-to-end mission alignment in this case makes very, very good sense.
What is the Earth Observing Nano Satellite Microwave instrument, and is that critical to weather forecasting? It obviously brand new. Does that introduce any unnecessary risk, and what process did you go through to determine it was an appropriate investment?
That EON microwave plays a couple of roles. It opens a pathway at a fairly low expense towards what could be a smaller, lighter, less expensive microwave sounder. The two instruments that the weather forecast system depends on critically, both are called sounders. They make profiles of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. They just work in different portions of the spectrum. The microwave one is the all-weather workhorse. So this conceivably could take the microwave sounder today and make it much smaller and more complex. It comes out of Lincoln Laboratories, and our systems engineering folks consulting with NASA and other partners as we are scouting the horizon for what might be new architectures we should be thinking of for down the road, noted that, evaluated it highly. So it gets us two things. If it proves out, it could be an avenue towards less expensive, good, competent microwave sounders. And secondly, it's on a time path with Lincoln Labs that it could also play a significant role as a gap mitigating effort in its own right. We're talking with NASA about co-investing in that because it's an interesting Earth observing technology from their point of view as well.
Thank you. Mr. Fattah?
To go closer to your own work, in part, earlier in your career, one of the budget items is about something around $150 million for a new vessel. Can you talk to us about the import of this and what it would be used for?
It is a very high priority for us this year. NOAA currently has a fleet of 16 ships, and oceanographic ships, you can easily think of them as basically small, medium, and large, based on how close to shore and how long offshore their mission requires them to stay. So if you're going out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to work on those tsunami buoys, you need a fairly large vessel with a big deck and heavy winches and the ability to stay out at sea a long time. If you're doing coastal nearshore fisheries work, you can work with a much smaller vessel. We've spent a good amount of effort these last couple of years looking very critically at the age of our current fleet. Vessels at sea have to be certified to operate under various maritime rating authorities, or they have to be retired. We've laid up seven ships since about 2003. So we're losing ship capacity now. When we stack up the observations, the scientific observing requirements that all of our different missions drive, we already don't have a fleet anywhere near substantial enough to meet those, which is why we rely so much on charter and other partners. But the important point is, as we look downstream and said, where are we going to be down the road, given the time it takes to procure a ship, half of our current ships will have aged out and be offline, laid up or tied up alongside or turned into razor blades by 2028. That's not very far down the road. And the group that is going to age out first is our mid to ocean class vessels because they're the oldest in the line. Excuse me, so that's what drives the timing of this ask, is to prevent that erosion of the fleet in the 2028 timeframe. This class of ship is driven, in our request, is driven by where we're going to have the gap first. And the other factor involved here is we propose to use an existing Navy design, and NAVC, the procurement arm for Navy ships, has a production line for this class of vessels still open. If we can seize this opportunity now, we can save the taxpayer something on the order of $10 million, actually probably a higher number, because if you delay and have to refresh the design and rehire the folks and restart the production line, that number probably goes higher than 10 by the time you're all done. Again, as with our space systems, we're not DARPA, we're not we're not the cutting edge systems guys. We don't try to be the first movers on big cutting edge systems. We try to parlay into existing acquisitions and systems and programs in the interest of cost efficiency whenever we can.
One other question, the other budget item is $3 million increase. This is a partnership in part with Brazil and the Air Force on a radio oscillation weather satellite.
Cosmic, radio
Yeah,
occultation with
Cosmic
Taiwan.
2, yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's right. There is an existing U.S.-Taiwan partnership that has a set of sensors in orbit now called Cosmic 1. And this is actually a very clever technique that was developed that observed that as GPS satellites send all their time signals back and forth to each other, the signal bends a little bit on its path from satellite to satellite based on the physical properties of the atmosphere. And you get some smarter scientists and clever mathematicians together, and they figured out how to extract from that bending angle information about moisture and temperature in the atmosphere, essentially a sounding. This sounding method can't penetrate all the levels of the atmosphere that our normal sounders do. It can't fully replace true vertical soundings, but it does provide a helpful correction. It has improved the quality of the forecast by stripping out biases in the other data. It ranks very highly when you stack up all the different kinds of data that contribute to the accuracy of weather forecast. It's in the top, certainly in the top 10. So we're requesting $3 million to continue with Cosmic 2. The current system is beyond its design life. It's proven its value. We'd like to replace that system with Cosmic 2 and continue to retrieve those sounders.
Unlike some of our economic competitors, we don't charge for these services, weather services, other information that's provided to the private sector. So I have a few companies like AccuWeather, and to benefit, all of our TV stations and others benefit from this service that's provided through the National Weather Service. And you also provide navigation information for navigation of the seas and so on. Do you, in terms of the work that you do, there's a lot of benefit to the American enterprise. If you could just spend a minute just talking about how NOAA has an impact on our economy, I guess is the way I would phrase it generally.
Thank you for that opportunity, Mr. Fatah. Yeah, the model here is one that considers let me call it the foundational data. I mean, vertical profiles of the atmosphere, fundamental measurements of the ocean bottom, and treat those foundational data as public goods. And so anybody, a college student, a kid with a cool idea for an app, AccuWeather, the weather company, anybody can get at those data without any barrier to entry and capitalize on them as they see fit. So the data become a tremendously powerful open innovation platform. You're well aware of the scale of the private sector weather enterprise, because with this model by design, NOAA stops at the foundational data. We don't try to be the spiffy guys that read the news, read the weather to you on TV, or compete with the private sector for apps and advanced analytics. So, the weather company, when it was sold to GE, went for about $4 billion. Climate Corporation, which is based on public good USDA and NOAA data, when it sold to Monsanto, was sold for $1 billion. Our electronic chart data, when I was at NOAA as the chief scientist, we printed the charts on gigantic printing presses in the basement of the main commerce building. Nowadays, we just send the data raw from the ship, quality controlled, and then out to third-party companies that do they package it into your electronic chart display if you're going out to sea. All your Garmin systems, if you're using offshore nav, they're using the NOAA data, or they'll publish you the chart book if you prefer to have the hard copy or want to have the backup. So the notion of foundational data about the planet as public goods that make sure that public safety never becomes a fee-for-service proposition, but is always a fundamental assurance of government, and that serve as this really vibrant, open innovation.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not arguing that we change it. I just wanted to make sure we make the point. It's different from, say, Germany or other countries where this information is sold.
Or where the government service takes roles that the private sector here takes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
No real additional questions other than I recalled sitting here, an invitation, a letter I sent to you last year, extending an invitation for the research vessel Nancy Foster to at least temporarily port down at St. Petersburg Bay Borough. We have a cluster there, a marine science research cluster there from USF Marine Sciences to NIMS to Fish and Wildlife to the U.S. Coast Guard Stanford Research Institute. It is a center of excellence in marine and weather science research, and they would welcome with open arms at least a temporary port of call from the Nancy Foster if you were to find interest or an ability to do so.
One of the joys of my life is how popular my ships are.
I bet.
Communities around the shoreline, but I do know that Welcome Matt is out, and it is a very, very impressive cluster of expertise.
Very good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Why not contract out more of this work? When I'm not a big traveler. One of the few trips I've ever taken has been out to go see Dr. Ballard and his flight on the Nautilus. They do extraordinary work, and the private sectors, I think the universities around the country would leap at the chance if NOAA was a customer, was offering to. I know Texas A&M, for example, is a wonderful oceanographic research vessel. Why not contract out more of this work rather than invest in purchasing new ships, which can be tremendously expensive and costly to maintain? I'm just a big believer in the Yellow Pages test. If you can find a service in the Yellow Pages that the government does, we should contract it out as much as we possibly can to provide better service at a better price for the taxpayers.
We currently contract out 50% of our charting and about 50% of our fisheries research. I can get you the precise figures. And even about a third of our Tau Array deep sea, which is the oddest one, because I've looked at the Yellow Pages, not a whole lot of listings for guys that want to go out to 15,000 foot of water and haul up buoys. So those are the roughly current percentages in those sectors now, and as I'm sure you know, our ocean exploration program co-funds Dr. Ballard's vessel.
Great success.
With great success. And when we put the evaluation together that led us to bring the ocean survey vessel request forward to you here, we did that side by side with the NSF folks who fund the ships and support the ships, such as the ones at A&M, and with the Coast Guard to make sure that we were not asking for an asset or a capacity that already is out there. The reality is, if you look at the National Science Foundation's proposal pressure, the scientific demands for ocean-going research that they face, as well as the scientific demands that we face, those combined far exceed their ships plus our ships plus everything else. So the demand remains much larger than either the federal civilian oceanographic fleet or the NOAA fleet or both of them combined.
Well, the existing fleet, I just wonder whether because I had the same question of NSF, and years ago I remember the Bush administration tried to transfer the responsibility for building and maintaining the ships that go to the Antarctic to the National Science Foundation from the Coast Guard, and NSF has got enough on their plate, so I fought hard to get that out of NSF. So I have the same question of the NSF.
Yeah.
If the money was out there and you were proposing to do this in the future, have you ever looked at, looking forward, encouraging the private sector, if there's a pot of money out there, we're willing to be a customer, there's X amount of money available. Have you seen any interest from the private sector or universities to? Well,
we've seen it in those areas where we have a good constant need, because that's a stable enough demand function.
Right.
They can look at it. And that's why we're up to 50%, slightly north of 50% on both our mapping and charting and our fisheries research vessels.
And the buoy, the maintenance of the tsunami detection system, you said you're up to about 80%, and that's with NOAA vessels?
That's the in-service. The data availability is at 80%. The Toga Tau buoys that give us the El Nino seasonal outlooks, we do about a third of that maintenance work with private sector vessels. We do, I don't know the percentage, but I could look it up, check into it for you. We have made international partnerships with other nations that benefit from the tsunami network to draw them into servicing buoys that are closer to their water, so that we're not bearing the cost of those long transits.
I'll follow up with you on that, but I'll also be following up on you. I'm very concerned about the report that came out in November that hackers from communist China had breached the computer systems at NOAA, and essentially the report was an AP that 4 of your websites were compromised by an internet-sourced attack, and my predecessor, Chairman Wolf, discovered that the attack originated in China and came only a couple of days after the Communist Chinese had also hacked into the U.S. Postal System computers and U.S. Postal Services computers and compromised information from some of its customers and employees. How long was NOAA's system down? I understood they actually took over control of some of those weather satellites, and could you talk to us a little bit more about what happened?
They certainly did
And-
not take over control of our weather satellites. I don't know where that misinformation may have come from.
Okay.
They did compromise some of our websites, and it took us several days. I'll have to get you the details, and we'll bring you a full briefing on that. Some of the
Okay.
information is sensitive because of threat
We'll sit
information
down
and
and visit
things
about it.
like
I
that.
know
But
Mr. Fatah's concerned about this. We all are.
we'll be happy
concerned
to
about it
bring
as
you a
well.
report on that.
And I also want to visit with you about the report that, let's see, when is this? This is Inspector General Report 1425A that just talks about the risks posed by the inconsistent implementation of mobile device protections, increases the likelihood of malware infection. I want to go through some of that with you as well, because cyber is so important, and it's a keen interest not just to NOAA, but obviously throughout the federal government, and it continues to look like the Chinese have been particularly bad actors in this area, and want to make sure that we're doing all we can to help
It's
protect
a dynamic and challenging threat environment, and we'd be happy to visit with you further on that. It is a priority of mine, as it is of the secretaries and the presidents.
I deeply appreciate your service to the country. I'll also be following up with you on making sure that the data is accurate in terms of making sure. Where I still can't find in your testimony where you said this is the warmest year on record. Warmest year on record where?
It was in my oral statement, and we can get you those statistics. The
mean,
global atmospheric average.
It was the warmest year on record throughout the entire planet, or in the United States, or where?
Average across the globe,
Average across the globe.
atmospheric
Okay.
temperature.
I'm keenly interested in following up with that, because as Mr. Jolly pointed out, we just want to make sure we get accurate data. And I was alarmed to see that there's been a lot of instances, documentation that estimates, weather data has been estimated or extrapolated and averaged up. I just want to make sure we've got accurate data to make good decisions. I do appreciate your service to the country, and we'll look forward to following up with you on these and other matters, and we'll submit any additional questions for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
And the
Chairman.
hearing is adjourned. Thank you.